So this is Claudia Filos. I'm with the Center for Atlantic Studies in Washington, D.C., and I work on two projects primarily, the Heroes X project and the Hour 25 project. And today I'm here with two really special people in our community. I just want to introduce just very quickly Joel Christensen, who is our visiting scholar, and I hope everyone can just introduce himself briefly.
Hi, this is Joel Christensen. I'm at the University of Texas at San Antonio and a fellow at the Center for Atlantic Studies this semester. And I work on Homer and I guess many other things.
Thanks, Joel. Brian, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Brian Prescott DC. I work at Lebanese American University in Beirut. My interests in the classics are fairly wide-ranging, but at the moment I'm working primarily on Antigone, Sophocles' Antigone. That do?
Thank you. So Joel, we're so excited that you're here to talk with us about Homer, and I know you've been spending a great deal of time of late thinking about the Odyssey, and you also spend a great deal of time thinking about sort of modern media in relation to that and the way that they can help us understand, I guess the way modern narratives can help us understand the narratives that we read in Homeric epic. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. For a long time, I guess I've been a bit of a comparativist, but not in the way that people usually are. I'm not really interested in finding, genealogical relationships between things. I'm really interested in sort of reading things together and seeing what kind of new meanings can be produced when you take things that aren't necessarily from the same place and time and see how they illuminate one another. Something like the Odyssey, it's so deep and meaningful, you carry it around with you. So when you encounter new things, it makes you see the text in a new way, especially when you look at complex and well-integrated narratives of different types. So, for instance, Breaking Bad is part of what people are calling the golden age of dramatic television, and I really think it's sort of at the end of it. But we're looking at a period back almost a decade now when television shows run full seasons, and they have developed arcs with complex themes and characters who really grow and change over time. And with someone like Walter White in Breaking Bad, you get a figure who transforms to the extreme. And I think in looking at this type of elaborated narrative, there are a couple different places where you can see real parallels for ancient myth and epic in general. But I guess that's just a starting point.
Right. So that's interesting. You're mentioning Breaking Bad. So you did come a few days ago and have a live, I guess, typed chat in a chat room with the members of our community. That was a great conversation. And one of the things that came up in our discussions before your visit and during your visit were the strong reactions that people had to the character, the main character of Breaking Bad, because he is, even in the beginning, I think, morally ambiguous, and by the end, certainly, I don't think there's anything ambiguous about it. He's pretty bad at that point. So, no, Walter White?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, and I think that in part I was sort of primed to see a comparison between Walter White and Odysseus because I've always hated Odysseus.
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, why?
Exactly. And so what I think is interesting is the community's response to some of the, let's say, derogatory things I've said about Odysseus. They don't want to hear it. And I've been having the same type of conversation in my classes for almost a decade now because every time I read the text, I feel less and less confident that this is a man we should be rooting for.
Yeah. So for me, I'm so excited because it's really helped me realize that. I've really been whitewashing Odysseus all these years.
Well, I think in the classic W.B. Stanford's book, The Ulysses Theme, one of the things he emphasizes is that, everybody hated Odysseus. Like, he's really a stage villain, as he calls him, in Athens. And Pindar says that famous thing where he says that Homer lied about Odysseus, and it's hard to see, even in the early classical period, how we're supposed to feel about him.
Right.
So when I saw Breaking Bad, I thought, look, this is a guy who's known for his intelligence, right? And he becomes defined by his own storytelling and his own craftiness, and he develops and evolves over time. And it became pretty clear for me, especially in his manipulation of name and identity, that he was functioning in a similar way as Odysseus, who in part is really sort of a stand-in for audience experience about identity. Right? And so a long time ago, probably the first time I taught the Odyssey, I was really struggling with how much I didn't like Odysseus. Right? And how dodgy he was as a character. And students, as we started to compare him to, say, Hector in the Iliad or Achilles in the Iliad, started to agree with me. And at one point, I found myself saying the following phrase. I said, look, Achilles, even with all his problems, is the guy you want to be. But Odysseus is the person you are. And I think this is really important, if we look at the Odyssey in sort of a cosmic history type of thing, where Odysseus is at the end of the race of heroes. He's the closest to a human being, right? And this is emphasized at the beginning of the Odyssey when it begins with the word andra, right? He is a man. He's not the son of a goddess. He's a human being, right? And so he's dirty, he's mischievous, he's cheating, he's lying. He does all of these things that human beings do to survive. And so Odysseus is the survivor. And I think that's an important, if you want to start with Walter White, that's important for Walter White in a couple ways. One, for 2 seasons, or 2 years, despite the odds, he's a cancer survivor, right?
Yes.
But beyond that, he becomes a survivor in a new way, right? In a world of crime, in a world of unfairness, where he's been, let's say, marginalized from what he sees as his rightful, let's say, economic accomplishment. He applies different, let's say, antisocial skills to survive in a new way, to even thrive, right? That's the story of Odysseus, right? The skills he learns at war are not the skills that translate into normal life, right? The skills you need to survive in the wilderness, outside the house and community, are not the skills that help you be a good husband, a good father, or a good leader of your people. And I think in the Odyssey we find then a tremendously complex negotiation between different characteristics that's similar to what we find in Breaking Bad, which is really sort of this modern fantasy, right, aimed towards people who feel somehow disenfranchised. Right? So I think, when I first watched the show, one of the things I write somewhere about it is that it came out soon after the Showtime show Weeds. Do any of you guys watch that? Right? And it's this fantasy of dabbling in criminal life, right? And using extra legal means that involve your intelligence and your own personal exceptionality to become something more. And I think it's a common fantasy that's been going on for a while, with love of gangster movies, the worshipping of Scarface, which is a terrible thing because the movie's actually dreadful and the character's evil. But we, vicariously live through these trickster figures. And so I guess I see that in Walter White too. And the transformation there is sort of this playing out of a fantasy, of being something more than you are, of not playing by the rules. And in this playing out of it, we see what the consequences are.
Right.
Sorry, I went on too long.
No, it's not too long at all. In fact, but I would like to introduce a few other members of our community who have joined us. So, actually, maybe the people who have joined since Joel started speaking could introduce themselves. That would be great.
Okay, I'm Janet Osolak. Hi.
Hi, Janet. Nice to meet you in person.
Nice to meet you too.
Hi, I'm Sarah Scott. Hello.
Hi, Joel and everyone. I'm Jack Vaughn.
Hi, Jack.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. So now does anyone have any questions, first of all, to what Joel has said, to maybe Brian?
Well, I have a thought to what Joel was saying. It has always struck me that an awful lot of these heroes have a negative side to them. If you run through the list, not the most obvious ones, but let's take Jason, for instance, the way he behaves in Corinth. Or take, vis-a-vis media, that is, of course.
Yeah.
Or take even Romulus as the prototype hero for the Romans. A cattle thief and with a bunch of gangsters, or Aeneas, the guy who ran away from Troy, and so on and so on.
Right.
They all have negative aspects, don't they? Would you agree with that?
I would, and this is part of what I love about Erwin Cook's article, Active and Passive Heroics in the Odyssey, is that he shows that from the kernel of the hero, given in the Homeric hymn to Heracles, it's clear that heroes suffer and mete out suffering, right? So they cause pain indiscriminately. And so I think what's really interesting in another book by Johannes Hubble and Barbara Graziosi is this idea of cosmic history, that part of what happens in the Iliad and the Odyssey is we see the end of the race of heroes, and we get motivations and justifications for it. The heroes, they're exceptional and they save the community, but also in their exceptionality, they're dangerous and they threaten the community. And so here again, we see sort of a negotiation or exploration of both the pleasures and perils of heroes.
Right. So I think one thing that's interesting about that is that in the Hour 25 and Heroes X projects, we've been talking about one of Greg's ideas about heroes, which is that they're extremes in both positive and negative ways. And I think this idea about causing suffering and I guess alleviating suffering, right? Or can you say that one more time about what they're doing with suffering?
Well, they mete it out indiscriminately, so they bring it both to their foes and their own people, right?
Okay.
So
right.
Achilles is the classic model of this. Heracles is an even more extreme model. And Odysseus is one whose potential to cause his own people pain is often overlooked until you go and add up how many Ithacans he kills. So this book, I don't know if you guys have seen it. This is Jonathan Shea's book, Odysseus in America.
Okay.
There are some things in which he's not a perfect reader of the epic, but there are other ways in which he does what only an outsider to Roman studies could do, which is just challenge some of the received wisdom. And he just adds up how many Ithacans died. Okay, and it turns out that there were 120 men per ship. He took 12 ships, so 1,440 men died before he even got back to Ithaca. And then he killed 108 men when he returned. So almost 1,600 Ithacans died thanks to Odysseus. And at some level, you have to wonder, can he avoid all blame whatsoever?
Right, right. And so, but that's what's so fascinating about the connections or the way that you're prompting us to think about a character like Walter White, because I having been sort of, this is going to be interesting, but a Homer junkie for 2 decades, right? I just love it and been immersing myself in that kind of violence and the negativity of that hero for all these years. Somehow when I turn to Walter White, I want to have this aversion to interacting with that, right? It's so, there's something about the idea of the genre that makes it seem more acceptable, right?
So Achilles slaughtering 12 Trojan youths on a pyre is okay with you?
No, exactly, but that's it. It's not that it's okay, but somehow it's epic and it's and that's a classy genre, right? This is a genre. Okay. Do you see what I mean?
No, I do.
Yeah, exactly. But so for me, what you've done is really help me rethink it and really rethink the way not just that there's longing for heroes, but that we need to think about how much maybe you weren't so. Maybe you're glad that hero was absent a lot of the time. I mean, they're bad news.
I've been thinking about this term lately in conjunction with the Odyssey and Breaking Bad. Have you guys heard the popular term revenge porn? Well, it's been used to describe things like Quentin Tarantino's movie Django Unchained, and the earlier one about Nazis. I can't remember the title of that one. But just
revenge. What? I didn't catch the second word.
Revenge porn.
Porn. P-O-R-N. Oh,
yeah, there you go. Sorry, I'm from New England, so my
I didn't know that Django Unchained was porn, but
I guess it depends what your interests are. But the idea of it is that it's excessive and visceral, and you delight in it in an unhealthy way. Okay, and so in Tarantino's violence, we know it's an obscene delighting in violence, right? Nobody thinks that it's healthy to enjoy this level of violence. It's an exploration of its limits. And I think because we've raised the Odyssey on a cultural level, we've closed ourselves off to the possibility that it is also testing and transgressing boundaries in the same way. And so the parallel I see that I really started to see both with Shay's book and with Breaking Bad is that in book 1 we have the suitors eating all of Odysseus's food, right? Then in book 9, we have Odysseus just going into Polyphemus' house and eating all his food, and Polyphemus starts to eat his men. In book 23, Odysseus goes in, closes all the exits so they can't escape in the same way that his men couldn't escape, and then he slaughters everybody, right? Because they were eating up all of his food. And that to me seems to be a clear analogy, right? The suitors are to Odysseus as Polyphemus is to Odysseus in book 23. And Breaking Bad has a similar structure in that, Walter White starts out entering dangerous territory and getting out of danger, but of course seeing death and destruction happen around him. And then at the end of this series, he becomes that death and destruction, and he becomes that monster. So I think those parallels are really important.
I'd like to take a minute to see if there's any questions from the people who are in our discussion, and also to let, we have one live viewer at the moment. We had a couple people who came and dropped in. Oh, but it looked like they just left the second I said that. I was going to invite them to leave a question in the Q&A, but that's okay. So does anyone here have a question for Joel? That means you guys, Sarah, Jack.
Well, I guess my question would be, why deign to compare this AMC, I don't know whether it's a sitcom or what. I haven't seen it, but I saw your summaries of it and of the storyline, and I have a friend who's a writer and critic who said that what I sensed about it was right on, that it's not really a high quality product. Why not just go directly to Faust and compare the Odyssey with Goethe's Faust?
Well, I think that's a great point. In fact, I think that one of the missing things in the comparison between Odysseus and a Walter White figure is that intermediary post-Christian influence of Faust in the story of Faust, which isn't really there in the Odyssey because the same notions of sin and righteousness aren't present in Greek society. But to the larger question of the act of comparison, I'm rather open to any narrative experience inviting new revision on older texts and themes. Because in part, it makes you as an interpreter or audience member see things in slightly different ways. So I don't always apply the quality value judgment when deciding whether or not it's worth comparison. On the other hand, though, I would like to defend Breaking Bad because just viewing it from its cultural and artistic context, compared to most of the drivel on television, it's well written, its themes are sustained, and the performances are outstanding. I think that it does present a sustained and investigated narrative and theme in a way that's often absent from modern storytelling. And one thing I think I talked about before you joined in, and that I didn't really expand upon, is the importance of the long duration narrative. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot. The ancient Greeks, when they were living with the Odyssey, they were living with Greek myth all around them. Like Odysseus was part of their lives from when they were really young until they were really old. And so as you grow and return to a narrative again and again, the narrative changes as you change, which I think is a crucial part of living with stories. And I think that modern television, in its episodic format, because it makes you or invites you to engage with characters over a long time, sort of mimics the experience of that type of long duration narrative. where you change with characters and where you get to see their story unfolding, and you get to discuss what's going on in between the different episodes. It's not exactly the same, but I think it's more analogous to what we do now, which is sitting down, reading a text, and then leaving it.
Hmm. Okay, so I just need to say, poor Jack, I just made a mistake, okay? I just muted you because I thought there was background noise, so I thought I could turn you back on, but I don't think I can unmute you. I'm so sorry. So if you have a follow-up statement, can you please type it into the chat bar? I'm still learning how to be the director, quote unquote. It never occurred to me they wouldn't let me unmute you again.
Maybe
I'm so sorry.
maybe he can unmute himself.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Jack? Sorry about this technical glitch. In the meantime, maybe Sarah, while Jack is typing, maybe Sarah, you looked like you had a question. Oh, good, Jack did unmute. Thank you. So sorry.
Okay, I have a question.
No
Or maybe he is going to follow up. Do you have a follow-up, Jack?
No, that's fine. You know, I can't engage on a lengthy debate concerning Breaking Bad, not having seen it. You know, I have some perceptions about, you know, what the you know, the moral value of the story is, which, you know, I think is kind of bad, to tell you the truth, because, you know, drugs are really the bane of American society. As you know,
I agree with you about the message problem, right? But it's a message problem that attends any narrative where you deal with complex issues. It's unclear what the audience takeaway is supposed to be. And I think the Odyssey presents the same problems. You know, in Book 23, are we supposed to be rooting for hanging up the handmaidens, stringing them up in the yard? I'm not convinced of that. And I think that you know, in the ancient world, that may or may not have produced similar anxiety about the lesson that's being derived. Don't forget that one of the reasons Plato wanted Homer edited in his Republic is that he was worried that people were too stupid to understand the difference between allegory and straight messaging. And that's basically what Socrates says, is that you can't trust people, they're dumb, so don't give them complex messages.
All right, so Jack, I muted you again because it sounds like there was barking in the background, so you'll unmute.
She's been excused.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
No.
Okay, well, yeah, and with Plato in the Republic, yes, he was very critical of Homer and the other tragedians, as he called them. Basically, introducing gods as doing terrible things, planting seeds of evil in humans. That's not godlike, according to Plato's Socrates. And
yeah, but if you follow Socrates' comments throughout the Republic, he doesn't really care about that. What he cares is that people will interpret it wrong. Right? I mean, Socrates and Plato quote Homer more than any other author, like in a scale of 10 to 1. And it's clear from the dialogue, the Ion, that Socrates can perform Homer better than the Rhapsody can, and interpret him better as well. So the flip side, I think, is that we need to measure the criticism against the, I guess, Platonic anxiety about controlling interpretation, which is something, you know, that I think Homer himself is concerned about. If you look at some, you know, certain parts of the epic.
I have a question.
Yes, Sarah, please go.
Okay.
Janet, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. If this is already said before, I'm sorry. Okay, Walt becomes at least starts becoming a hero as soon as he starts breaking the rules, right? Even his relationship with his wife changes from the first episode on. So
right.
There are, if those heroes are the heroes we have seen in the epic and Walt, they are not obeying the same rules as we are obeying. So when you criticize Odysseus, but he killed the suitors, then we are bringing Odysseus back to our morals. But they have separate sets of rules and separate sets of moral. Don't you agree?
I think it's a great point, but I think there's always the potential to say, well, what's the implication of the fact that we set apart individuals to live by different rules, right? So if you want to stay with Walter White for a moment, what you learn over the run of the show is that his decisions corrupt everybody around him. So his life in drugs ruins his wife eventually. She becomes complicit in his crimes. It ends up in the death of his brother-in-law. It alienates everyone around him, really just poisons everything, right? So, I mean, part of the lesson of the Odyssey is that even heroes don't exist alone, right?
It looks
they
like
need a community. And so...
Brian, I'm sorry, Brian, did you have a question about what Joel said?
Yeah, well, not a question. I have a thought on that one.
Okay.
Surely the morals of the late Bronze Age, the morals of the period of Socrates, the morals of the Hellenistic era, and our morals will all be different and are all equally valid within the context of an audience reading the Odyssey, no matter what they are. We're all entitled to bring our morality to the play, to the content, to the story, and see how we react to it from that point of view, wouldn't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Which is why when I teach it or write about the Odyssey, what I try to do is sort of, let's say, toggle between two different perspectives. One, what's our reader response now? Even if anachronistic, what happens to us when we read the text? And then two, I try to weigh that against the reactions within the text, right? So what we might call internal reactions, or the reaction of the internal audience. Which is why when I think about what happens in Book 23 of the Odyssey, I think it's really important and critical that we look at the assembly of the Ithacans in Book 24 and what Odysseus himself says in Book 23. He says, even somebody who kills one man needs to run away from his homeland, needs to go into exile out of fear of that man's kinsmen. And he doesn't say that those kinsmen are wrong, right? He tries to control the message and hide his actions, right? And so I think someone in the community asked a nice question. I think it was someone named Jessica about the ekplason of the Odyssey, about how the gods wipe away the memory and what it means, right? And I think, by wiping away the memory of what has happened, you're wiping away epic itself, right? We all know that Odysseus is famous for his vengeance. What happens if the gods at the end of the epic say, well, we have to make everybody forget about this, right? That's an indication that something wrong has happened.
Yeah, and at one point he even says to Athena, right? He's sort of trying to figure out how are we going to kill all these people, just me? And Athena basically says, and I think he says, I don't see how I could be like one person against all of them. Yeah. And she basically says, listen, I'm on your side. It's going to be okay. And so what does that have? How does that change it? The fact that really it's the God who's saying, just go for it, go for the slaughter.
I mean, this is one place where I get a little confused. I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to feel about the gods at the end of this. Of course, the Greek gods aren't supposed to make sense, right? The Greeks didn't expect that. But when you look at it, it seems more than capricious. It seems absolutely vindictive. And I think there's a sense that, hey, sometimes the gods are out to screw us. There's nothing we can do about it.
What is it that Antigone says that the gods vent their own evil on humans?
Yeah.
That humans pay the price for the evil of the gods.
Yeah, and this is
that's something to think about.
Yeah, and that's something powerful from Sophocles, right? But the epic is engaged with this issue from the beginning. When Zeus looks down and he says, mortals are always blaming us for their troubles, but they make their fate worse than it needs to be because of their own recklessness, right? And so this says, hey, man and God conspire together to ruin lives. Maybe life could be a little better.
Sarah, did you have a question, Sarah?
Yes, I was following up on what you were saying about everything's going to get forgotten, and so does that mean that Odysseus does not have to go into exile, and yet we know he's going to have to leave again anyway.
Yeah.
He's going to effectively be in exile. He's going to go off with his winnowing shovel or oar or whatever, and so how does that all fit in?
And you know, it is sort of tricky to declare that everything's going to be forgotten, even as we're reciting what has allegedly been forgotten. And so I don't know if there's a way out of that narrative loop, right? And part of the way that I am thinking about it is that the Odyssey is really anxious about things. Or not anxious, is really conscious of stories that don't have closure. And so there are 2 points in the epic where similar words or words that are related to that word eklesin come into importance. So in Book 1, when Telemachus tells Penelope not to get upset about the stories of the homecoming, she says that the stories give her, I think it's penthos allaston. Similarly, in Book 4, Menelaus says that the story of Odysseus alone doesn't bring him pleasure. It brings him akos alaston, or alaston akos.
So can you gloss those? Can you gloss those for us?
I'm going to.
Oh, sorry.
In both cases, we have grief being called alaston, which means unforgettable. It's related again to that word lanthano, which gives us the river Lethe, the Greek word for truth, aletheia, which means something that is not forgotten, and that word eklesin again at the end of the Odyssey. So the Odyssey seems to show that stories that don't have resolution cause excessive amounts of pain because we don't know what's going to happen. And for me, this is integrated directly with the idea of fate and free will that's floated at the beginning of the Odyssey. People both want to know stories and how they're going to end, but they also want the freedom to write their own tales. And there's an essential tension there between wanting the freedom to write your own end and wanting to know that there's someone in control, or wanting to know fate. I think when we get to the end of the Odyssey in an essential way doesn't want to give you a real end. So Odysseus is traveling to Phoenicia, or wherever he goes, is connected in part to the poetic tradition, to the mythical tradition where he has to go elsewhere, as we know he's going to. But it's also connected to the Odyssey's poetic concern about ending the poem. It's saying, we're not going to give you a real ending because you have to provide it.
Just like you don't really have a real beginning because you've got any point of departure. You can start kind of anywhere. So you kind of finish anywhere.
And I think, not to go too far into Freudian readings of the Odyssey, but I think there's a direct connection between our anxiety about the end of the tale and anxiety about death and the end of our lives, right? I mean, Odysseus wants to know, or cries when he doesn't know what's going to happen to him, when he loses control. But once he has control again, he just keeps going, as much as if there's no lack of energy while he's still alive. And I think that the epic itself resists bringing an end to its tale because naturally the tale translates into the real world, right? Into life itself, and into the world of the ancient audiences. And so it leaves it open-ended because it invites you not just to write the end of the Odyssey, but to imagine new stories for your own life.
Joel, that's so beautiful. Listen, I wish we could keep talking, but we've already gone over 30 minutes, and I know everyone's schedule is very busy. We're fitting this into a very tight day. So I just want to take the time to thank you for being here and thank everyone for joining us.
Well, thank you for your questions. And I'm going to keep trying to answer some on the bulletin board if you guys are still interested.
Oh, my gosh. Sure.
I didn't catch the title.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
When I first tuned in, I didn't catch the title of the essay before mentioning the book on...
I've got it.
You have it in the notes.
Odysseus in America?
Before that book, you mentioned an essay that talked about two ways of looking at the Odyssey.
Yeah, active and passive heroics. I'm typing it in for you. It's I don't know the original publication, but it's also in the book Reading the Odyssey. I think Lillian Doherty is the editor, but it's pretty easy to find. And if you email me, I'll share the reference.
Thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you, Jack.
Joel, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll post links in our discussion forum. So thank you, everybody.
All right.
Take
Have
care.
a great day.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.